In the 1950s, the United States enjoyed an unprecedented economic boom, resulting in the rapid expansion of the American middle class. It was the golden age of American consumerism. The success of the American economy was idealized in the West, which saw itself as proof of the superiority of capitalism in our Cold War struggle against communism. Throughout America, modern, even futuristic styles took hold as Americans sought to shed the economic and wartime struggles of the past. Boise quickly joined the rest of the country in this modernist age, and its development reflected both progressive growth and conservative societal values. In the 1950s, the quintessential American suburb sprouted on the periphery of every urban center to accommodate the growth of the nuclear family and the single-family home. During the decade, the population growth rate in Ada County was nearly double the national average, and the high quality of living in Boise was due in part to its own corporate successes. Local firms like Morrison Knudsen, the Boise Payette Lumber Company, Simplot, and Albertsons were just a few that really flourished during the war, maintaining a dynamic economy in Boise by providing jobs to a growing community. By 1950, Boise's urban population made up only 1/2 of the total population for Ada County, and what had once been orchards, dairies, and family acreage was subdivided for residential suburban development. Ada County's agricultural output slowed, for the first time in decades, to just 1/3 of its pre-war numbers, as many of Boise's surrounding acres were turned into housing developments and strip malls. Settlement in the suburbs increased, and with the baby boom generation in full force, country schoolhouses were no longer able to meet the needs of the growing rural population. School consolidation efforts put an end to the smaller schoolhouses all over Ada County, as Franklin, Whitney, Washington, Garfield, and other regional schools absorbed children from the surrounding areas. When Boise High School was built in 1903, the city expected it would easily accommodate the entire population, but it had to undergo continual renovation throughout the years as the population increased. Reports conducted on the Boise High campus in the 1940s suggested that further expansion was not feasible, and yet, by 1949, the Boise School District had absorbed students from 7 neighboring school districts. By 1951, the school board knew it could not accommodate the growing number of students at Boise High, and began working on plans for Cosmopolitan High School, a new central school to be built south of the river. After the success of the Boise College campus, school trustee Zed Foy and several others suggested building a single metropolitan high school, including a public civic auditorium, near the growing Boise Junior College campus, west of Capitol Boulevard and south of the river. The city consented, and the school district purchased 150 acres between Capitol and Americana Boulevard in the hopes it could build a school of tomorrow. These plans for a large, central school were met with determined resistance from rural communities that were opposed to paying city taxes. That independent spirit prevailed in 1956 when plans for Cosmopolitan High were scrapped, and Ada County voters approved a bond that provided nearly $2 million to build a high school on the bench. Bora High School was eventually built in 1958 as Boise's second major high school and represented the growing neighborhoods on Boise's bench. Post-war subdivisions across the United States and in Boise took shape with new planning priorities. In 1944, the building firm Levitt and Sons set the model with a contract to construct 140,000 single-family homes to house some of the 16 million returning veterans and their families. The Federal Housing Administration and the Servicemen's Readjustment Act provided a mortgage program to veterans, giving them a chance at home ownership. The combination of federal spending and insurance programs facilitated an unprecedented building boom that would benefit builders and buyers everywhere. Many of Boise's suburban homes were built using ready-made plans with ready-made parts. These types of kits had been popular since the 1930s, but now they were being built using a production line type of task specialization, where each crew was responsible for only one portion of the structure. At the height of post-war building, crews at Levittown in New York were capable of constructing up to 30 homes a day. The homes conformed to 3 or 4 styles that intended to increase production and were not meant to stir the imagination, but to provide the best shelter at the least price. Levitt's method was adopted all over the country, and in Boise, the minimal traditional, Tudor revival, and especially the ranch house were the predominant style of home built in the post-war period, conforming to the look and feel of suburbs everywhere. Not all new housing developments were so uniform. New neighborhoods, such as the Highlands, not only featured futuristic amenities like intercoms and sliding walls, but were model communities for young urban professionals wanting the latest in home design. Flat roofs, large windows, and new appliances were on display as Boise's first parade of homes took place in the Highlands in 1956, and the community was a definite trendsetter for several decades. While the cookie-cutter nature of suburban sprawl dominated suburban expansion, not all architecture in the decade was that pedestrian. Frank Lloyd Wright had dominated high architectural style in the preceding decades using principles of organic architecture, a response, perhaps, to the post-war trend of using industrial materials in homes and businesses across America. While Idaho features only one Wright-designed home in Hagerman, Boise has several Wright-influenced buildings. Like Wright, Pietro Beluschi, one of the Northwest regionalists, believed that the built environment should be dictated and informed by the natural environment. The Idaho Statesman hired Beluschi to build their 5th building downtown at 300 North 6th Street. The building's marble facade and unassuming ochre palette imitate the color scheme of the surrounding foothills against the horizon. Art Troutner, an Idaho architect, is our best local example of an adaptation of Wright's modern style. Troutner synchronized industrial elements from his experience as a machinist during the war with Wright-esque organic styles, using natural materials reflecting the Idaho landscape. For example, he blended his round wooden foothills home into a rock outcropping using a central pole and trusses, and his forward-thinking design still looks modern today. The Phillips House, completed in 1958, is constructed of glass, metals, and plastics, all popular post-war industrial materials used by Troutner for their low cost and efficiency. As his designs were meant to make the most of the surrounding environment, the vaulted space and large windows in the Phillips home highlight the space around it. The Boise Little Theater on Fort Street echoes the shape and materials used in Troutner's own home, and all 3 buildings used a Troutner-designed laminated wood beam and truss product that revolutionized construction. From these experiences, Troutner founded the Truss Deck Joist Company in Boise in 1960, commercializing his unique structural designs. Troutner homes found in Boise and Idaho Falls still thrill modern architecture lovers today. Near the sprawling subdivisions, developers began building commercial sites. Many of these were constructed in the post-war period using neon lights, glass windows, and metal frames and siding, in line with the mid-century modernist rejection of past architectural traditions and media. These new commercial strips were planned to cater to the growing number of local subdivisions and neighborhoods. Suburban shopping centers and strip malls were built to accommodate the automobile, and storefronts were set a distance back from the road specifically to provide parking. Vista Village, Boise's first strip mall built in 1949, featured roomy parking spaces and a number of shops catering to local interests. Shoppers could go from one of Boise's first Albertsons grocery stores to the Vista Theater to Whitehead Drug Store and finish with a treat at either A&W Drive-In or local favorite Lee's Candies. The Day family realty business was instrumental not only in developing Vista Village, but many of the neighborhoods around it in a mixed-use commercial and residential layout that reflected the consumerist society in Boise at the time. The personal automobile changed Boise, as it did many places in 50s America. Popular theaters and restaurants were the drive-ins. The Boise streetscape was dominated by gas stations. Cruising downtown streets was a must for a weekend, and suburban homes were planned with built-in garages and carports. Many neighborhoods simply neglected to build sidewalks, as few walked further than the mailbox in their neighborhood. While communities were designed around the car, the larger Boise landscape also experienced drastic change in order to accommodate people's new movement patterns. This resulted in a subtle friction between downtown interests and patterns of public migration west of Boise. This friction was apparent in the decade-long battle over the proposed route of the interstate highway. In the early 50s, there were proposals for a penetrator route leading through the heart of downtown, a ridge route that followed a federal way down the valley floor through the 150 Riverside acres the school board purchased for a school that never materialized, and there were proponents for a bypass route that would allow Boise to easily access the highway without inflicting any harm to existing local communities. The ridge route was nixed permanently when Harry Morrison, founder of the Morrison-Knudsen engineering giant, met with City Council, the mayor, a representative from the school district, and the City Planning Commission to discuss the purchase of those Riverside acres. He was opposed to any route that would allow the highway to run north of the First and Second Bench neighborhoods, where he and other successful Boise businessmen, such as Joe Albertson, had built their homes. Following in the path of past entrepreneurs and city fathers, Harry Morrison used the land to build Ann Morrison Park in dedication to his wife, who passed in 1957. The Idaho State Historical Society Museum had been completed in 1950, just north of the Art Museum on Julia Davis Drive. These Riverside developments and the success of the college campus highlighted the attraction of the Riverside parks as the periphery expanded, making the Boise River the new center to what was starting to become the new Boise metropolitan area. Post-war suburbanization posed a challenge to businesses downtown that had for so many generations served as the central engine to producers, consumers, and suppliers of Boise's commercial pursuits. Urban sprawl left downtown Boise businessmen and politicians desperate. As Boise moved closer to its centennial, business owners attempted to modernize their frontier facades by covering the stone-cut storefronts with metal and vinyl siding and neon lights. Some of Boise's most architecturally unique buildings, such as the old Boise City Hall, were demolished in the 1950s as downtown Boise tried to overcome its pioneer heritage with the construction of modern warehouses, drugstores, banks, and markets in their place. The struggle to preserve would fall short of the desire to modernize in the 1960s, as urban redevelopment programs targeted much of historic downtown Boise. As in much of America, Boise was heavily influenced in the 1950s by exploding demographics, the automobile, and a new modernist culture. Our neighborhoods grew, and downtown underwent a facelift. The times were quickly changing.